Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We are recording this episode on a Monday morning after United's goalless draw against Crystal Palace on Saturday evening. I was down at that game in Croydon. What a pain in the bum it is to get to Selhurst Park by vehicle in car. And I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst, who went down the game on train. Samuel went down using different forms of transport. You've got a little injury, should we call it, at the moment. How are you feeling on this Monday morning?
Rested after the weekend's excursions, but as you said, it is a long way to get to. There's someone at United who said that they once drove to Leicester, and it was quicker getting to Leicester than it was getting to Crystal Palace, and they live in North London, so that gives you an idea of how, even though it's just the other side of the river for them, what a trek it is to get to Croydon. Even the Uber drivers don't venture there, it seems, given my experience post-match on Saturday as well.
Obviously, I took Rich Fay down. He said the first time he went to Selhurst Park, he swore never again. But I dragged him down with me for the game on Saturday. And it was a cracker in the first half, Samuel. There were plenty of chances. Somehow we didn't get a goal. I thought it was one of the most impressive first half performances from United I've seen in a long time, actually. They had a lot of control. They were playing with a higher defensive line. And like I said, it was a miracle that really they weren't ahead at the break. That changed after half time. The substitutions did change the game. Palace grew into it and had chances of their own as well. Obviously, Andrew Onana produced what a world-class double save that was around with 20 minutes to go. We'll get into that a bit later. But just first, initially, your thoughts on the game, because, as I say, there were positives to take. But I guess when you're leaving after a 0-0 draw, when you play that in the first half, you're going to have a better taste in your mouth against Palace when you could have really won the game.
It was the best first 45 minutes from them since Wolves away in February. And that night they were 2-0 up at half time, and you still thought at half time they should be further ahead. And that's still the problem. And football is not a complicated sport, despite people trying to overcomplicate it with all these new metrics coming in. But ultimately, the reason why United have won two of their first five Premier League games is because they still struggle to score goals. And they are top of the table for the big chances missed in the Premier League. I think the Premier League have them down as having missed 17 big chances. Villa are second on 12, so there's a pretty big gap between first and second as far as that's concerned. And those chances are memorable. The vast majority of them, it's not difficult to recall them. Against Fulham, there must have been 4. There must have been 2 or 3 against Southampton in the game. They won 3-0. They had 2 or 3 against Liverpool. Ahmad had 1 against Brighton. The Garnacho Xerxes disallowed goal that day, that was a big chance that United wasted because of Xerxes rather daftly sliding in after the ball had gone past him. And at the weekend, Garnacho had a couple, De Ligt had 1. Strangely, in terms of big chances, maybe they had more in some of their other games than they did at the weekend, but they were very creative, and their creative play has been good since pre-season. But unfortunately, it feels like maybe that Liverpool game in South Carolina has set the tone for certainly the start of the season, that in that game they played well in chunks of it, but they didn't take their chances. Liverpool are a much more clinical team because they do have reliable goal scorers, and they won 3-0. And then, of course, they won 3-0 about a month later in a game that mattered at Old Trafford. So that's why United are 11th in the Premier League table. It's why they've scored, five league goals in 5 games. Regarding these past 3 games that they've had, of course, they won the first 2 by an aggregate scoreline of 10-0, but Palace was always going to be the most reliable gauge of where this team is at, and it kind of is where this team is at. I thought it was a very fair reflection on the current United, in that they're much more difficult to break down. They're more compact. They're a lot more proactive when they're in possession. I think they've had the majority of possession in all 5 games so far this season, but they're creating chances with it. They're just not taking them. In terms of chance creation, that's not a problem at all. They're doing brilliant work there, and there's a lot to admire. Unfortunately, then it's the chance conversion which is the issue, and that has been the issue really since Ronaldo left, and it was masked for a season because Marcus Rashford caught fire, got 30 goals, and they had a successful first season. Last season, one of the reasons why they had as bad a season as they had was because they didn't have a reliable goal scorer. And maybe Rasmus Højlund will be, maybe the panacea for them. But he's not a reliable goal scorer either. And he's also been a better substitute than starter since March. So they need someone to really catch fire again, but not just someone. It's got to be shared around, because there is potential in a lot of the forwards that they have, but it has to happen sooner rather than later if they're to have a more successful season than last season, as far as the league is concerned. Anyway,
I think the reaction to the performance has actually been really fascinating in the last few days, or last 2 days. I've had some tweets off fans saying there's lots of positives to take. That first half performance was incredibly impressive away from home. The control that they had, how compact the midfield was. They were winning the second balls in the centre of the pitch. And I've had some fans say, well, if you can't beat Crystal Palace away from home, that's terrible. And the manager's substitutions weren't good enough, and they give United a worse chance of winning the game in the second half. I'd actually be in favour of taking the positives from it, Samuel. I think the first half was very good. I think Ten Hag got his tactics right. And as you say, the biggest problem was the finishing. And as a manager, you can't account for that. That's your players. You put them out on the pitch. They're supposed to do the job, put the ball in the back of the net. Garnacho had that chance when Xerxes played him through. To be fair, Dean Henderson, of course, played out of his skin, didn't he? Became prime David De Gea. That was always probably going to happen.
I wouldn't go that far. I think
he made a few good saves.
He made saves that were savable. I don't think any of them was a great save. Andre Onana had no right to make that save on the rebound.
Yeah,
that was the save of the night. That was a world-class save. The saves Henderson made, they were good saves, but they weren't difficult saves. He got the man of the match because he made the most saves in a 0-0 game. That's how it works. And fair enough. I think it should have gone to one of the two keepers, but they were not great saves. I mean, De Ligt's header, that kind of hit Henderson. If he's not saving that, he's made a mistake there. The Garnacho one was a good save. I'm trying to think of the other stops he made.
The first Garnacho chance was a really good save, I thought. And obviously, I mean,
where
Garnacho hits the bar and then Fernandez hits the bar. So that's not Henderson, is it? I suppose after that,
no,
they should have buried those chances, shouldn't they? And Fernandez had a chance in the second half as well when Xerxes played quite a clever pass first time. He hit it first time, Fernandez, and it went around the post. So there was just so many chances to win the game. I think me and you started writing a blog post at the same time, just before half time, and we kind of both said something along the lines of, this is becoming a joke now. How aren't United ahead? And they were almost made to pay in the second half when Onana was called into action. Should we talk about the decision to bench Rashford then? That was obviously a really huge call. I don't think anybody expected it. He had goals. He scored his first goal of the season against Southampton, looked really sharp against Barnsley. We expected him to start on the left, and then he's benched. What was your reaction at that before the game? And did it pay off? I suppose it didn't, because they didn't score. And when he came on, he played centrally. And I think sometimes you watch Xerxes and you don't think he does much and he's not much of a goal threat, and that's fair enough. But what he brings in terms of his build-up play and link-up play, I think he was hugely beneficial on Saturday. I think he did a lot with the ball at his feet.
As the cliche goes, it's a funny old game, because United looked like scoring with someone on who did not look like scoring, and then when that player went off, but their goal threat reduced. I think the only flaw in Ten Hag's game management the weekend were his substitutions. When Rashford was coming on, I thought, fair enough, it's the right time to bring him on. I expected Ahmad to go off at that point, or at least one of the wingers, probably Ahmad, because Garnacho was more of a goal threat and was more involved. And when it was Xerxes, I was slightly surprised by that, because Xerxes, as I was told by, I spoke to a manager who'd watched him a fair bit in Italy, and he said he likes to drop deep, good link-up play, but not sure he gets enough goals. And that is what United have got so far. He is very good at linking up the play. He created two pretty good chances for Fernandez and Garnacho at the weekend. He should have created another one for Garnacho in the first half, where no, he couldn't. And sometimes he almost malfunctions. It feels like, I mean, it happened quite often in the first half against Liverpool. But he also had a really good chance with the header from Ahmad's corner. So if you're signing a striker, but everybody was aware of his goals record, and he is a striker who does not have a proven goal scoring record, that is going to be a problem if he's leading the line. Yet with him leading the line United were better at the weekend. When Rashford came on, they just went flat. And Palace had started to manage the game a lot better by that point. Glasner, who looked very, very irked in the first half, and Palace fans were irked as well because they were really, really not playing well at all. But he made some tweaks. Palace were a lot better, having made those adjustments in the second half. And in this strange game where United dominated it for at least an hour and had a hatful of chances, the best chances of the evening fell to Palace. The two for Eze were great chances. The second in particular was a real glaring opportunity. And Ismail Assar on the rebound. There were Palace fans on their feet just below us who were convinced that the ball was about to drop in, but Onana somehow managed to claw the ball away. And for a lot of that game, it felt like it was going to be win or bust for United. And of course, it ends up in a draw. And that's just what made it such a strange game to make head or tail of. I mean, I think certainly the pieces I'm doing today and the coverage of United, they're positive. It's not negative. And I think looking at that result at the weekend, you would look at it in a negative light, and looking at what Onana said, he was almost coming out with the cliche that it feels like a defeat, and it should do, and they should be disappointed with it. But they do look a much better side now, and the frustrating thing for them, of course, will be that the progress that they are making, that you can see in the performances, bar Liverpool, is not being reflected in the points column or the goals for column. And ultimately, despite what some pseudo-intellectuals in football may think, goals do win you football matches. And United have spent more than £100 million on two strikers who do not have good enough goal-scoring records. And you look at the elite teams in Europe, Real Madrid have Kylian Mbappe, Bayern Munich have Harry Kane, City have Erling Haaland, Liverpool have Mohamed Salah, just as 4 examples. All those 4 clubs clearly have got at least one outstanding, dependable, reliable goal scorer. United do not have that, and until one player or 2 players or however many players start to become prolific, that is going to be a problem for them, and that's why it's a pressing matter for them that some of these players start to improve their conversion rate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, would it be? I saw someone tweeting about Garnacho as well, and they were talking about a boom bust cycle. I actually think this was quite harsh. And they were saying when he starts games,
do we want to reflect on someone tweeting who?
Well, it was a well-followed account. I'm not going to name them, but I'm not going to name. But my point is, Samuel, I think it is harsh because he comes into the team, right? People say he needs to start, and then perhaps he might not have the most convincing performance, like on Saturday, he missed chances, but he was heavily involved. I actually thought Ahmad was the weaker performer out of the 3.
He was,
in last season. I mean, Garnacho, he had plenty of starts when he performed and did well. So I think that was wrong. I think it's interesting to make the point. The reason why I said on the preview podcast about why I'd start Xerxes down the middle was kind of proven on Saturday evening. I think when you play Rashford down the middle, you lack that focal point. And I know they got away with it against Barnsley because, lads, it was Barnsley. But against better opposition, you just don't have that. And you are sacrificing goals because, as you've just said, Xerxes is blunt. He does not look like a natural goal scorer. But his build-up play and how he brings his teammates into the game, I think helps United a lot. And it was evident against Southampton, wasn't it? Although he probably should have scored himself. But you're right, they've spent close to 100 million, well, over 100 million on 2 strikers who aren't prolific goal scorers. And that's poor planning, again, from the club. Into the second half, then, Samuel, before we end this part, we'll mention Lisandro Martinez because he must have had a rush of blood to the head. I don't know what he was doing. He was a very lucky boy not to be sent off. Kind of went in with 2 feet. I forget which Crystal Palace player it was, but that was a moment that United got away with, didn't it, on Saturday?
I don't know about that. I think that it was a daft thing of him to have done. There had to be a card shown. I think the referee got it right in that the player probably in that split second. It's difficult for a referee in that case, in that he has to make a very quick call and judge whether. And I know he's obviously got VAR to possibly bail him out, but you certainly can't count on that all the time. But he has to make the judgment of whether the player was endangered by Martinez's action. And my gut instinct when I saw it was, Christ, that was silly, but I don't think he was going to maim him or break his leg or inflict any dire damage on the opponent, because he did get the ball. And I know has ceased to be an excuse for tackles for several years now. If a referee had shown red card, there's no way VAR would have overturned that. It's one of those contradictions of VAR, I suppose, and that where it was a yellow card, and when you saw the replay of it, I didn't think, having seen a replay of it, that VAR was going to intervene there. Yet you know that if the red card had been shown to Martinez, then there was no way VAR were going to say, actually, it's a yellow card. So I actually think that it was just sensible refereeing. It was clearly going to be a talking point after the game, because the game ended goalless and there wasn't much to go at apart from get it going on and on about Rashford. And in fairness to Ed Aarons of The Guardian, that did pay off at the post-match press conference, with Ten Hag having a pop at Jamie Redknapp. But that was the only other real talking point, I suppose, from the game, the Martinez tackle. And look, it feels like he's done that before, but he actually hasn't. He's actually, although he's a very ardent defender and full-blooded and committed, he has managed that balance pretty well during his time at United, and he's not a card collecting defender. I think it was just an overzealous challenge, and you saw it from a couple of other United players. They were making these overzealous challenges because I think it was almost a form of frustration or desperation, knowing that they had missed quite a lot of chances and they wanted to keep the ball. They wanted to get on the attack as soon as possible. So I actually think that the referee was pretty sensible in his handling of it.
It could have gone either way. You've seen them giving, haven't you? Those sendings off. I mean, I think he's been a little bit more rash this season, actually, Martinez. He's diving into challenges a little bit more than he had in the past. But again, I guess that's just part of his game. He has that natural aggression, and you wouldn't want him to take that away, would you? Because it makes him the player that he is. We'll leave it there for part one, and we'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, as I like to say, it's time to give Andre Onana his flowers. That double save with around 20 minutes to go. I think it was around 68th minute, roughly around then. It was Eddie Nketiah who shot from the edge of the box, and Onana gets down with a really strong left hand. And what he does after that is the moment of brilliance, isn't it, really? To get up, the athleticism to actually get up instinctively and make that save. Initially, when I looked at the replay, or when I watched it, I thought Ismail Assar had turned it wide. And then when you watch the replay and it becomes clear that Onana saved it, it's world-class save, that's what it is. I spoke to him after in the mixo and I actually asked him about it. And he basically just said it's confidence. When you're in the flow and you feel like you're playing well, you do these things naturally. But it wasn't always like this for Onana, Samuel. He had a difficult time when he first joined the club. I think you spoke to him after Nottingham Forest, was that correct, at the City ground? And he's always good when he speaks. He's quite candid, isn't he? So that save was an example of the quality that he has.
Yeah, on the radio yesterday, it was a bit of a perfunctory debate of, is David Raya in the debate now as to who's the best goalkeeper in the world, with Alisson and Ederson. And look, I know Raya's going to get a lot more kudos at the moment because Arsenal are a very difficult side to break down. Ordinarily, they weren't yesterday, and they've kept a hell of a lot of clean sheets this calendar year. But I think Onana's a more complete goalkeeper, and he's certainly been a busier goalkeeper over the last year as well. And regarding that save, the follow-up save, I mean, I think I've touched upon it before. One of the criticisms I have of Onana is that sometimes when he makes saves from shots, his contact with his hand is too flush. And I remember bringing it up last September or October that when he does that, he always risks a chance on the rebound. And that's exactly what happened. And I was thinking when he made that save and it looked like Sarr was destined to score, I thought this is probably going to go down as an Onana error, because he should have been turning it around the post or just getting a finer glove on it to get it out of harm's way. But he created, in a way, the chance for Sarr. Yet his reactions were phenomenal. We see it when goalkeepers are training. They work on these drills of, going down to ground to make a save and then getting back up as soon as possible in case there's a rebound. And that's why they do that work in anticipation of that opportunity possibly falling to an opponent. And it doesn't happen very often, but of course it did on Saturday. And you watch the replay in slow motion, and Onana is still really quick with his reactions to get him back onto his feet so that he's in a position to claw the ball away. And I think 4 defenders or 4 teammates went up to him afterwards pretty much to celebrate his goalkeeping, and he deserved their embrace because it was a genuinely world-class save. It gets on my goat the amount of times pundits say, "Oh, that's a great save by a goalkeeper," and you look at it and think it's not a great save. If it's within reach, they should be saving it. And in the case of the first save from Nketiah, I didn't think it was a good save by Onana because, as I said, he got too flush of contact on it, and it gave Sarr the chance on the rebound. The save on the rebound was world class. It'll possibly be it will be a contender for save of the season because it is the type of save that a goalkeeper has no right to make whatsoever.
It's now 3 clean sheets in the last 5 Premier League games. I think the settled back 4 has helped a lot, hasn't it? With De Ligt coming into the side. Obviously, Mazraoui's been playing with Dalot and Martinez. De Ligt made quite a strong impression, I actually think, in the last few weeks. Obviously, scored against Southampton. He could have scored in the first half against Palace. But you've just mentioned that moment there when they rushed to Onana. There seems to be a real unity among those players at the moment. And when you think about how many different back 4s Ten Hag had to pick last season, it was silly, wasn't it? The number of the players he had to chop and change, and Willy Kambwala was coming into the team, and players were playing out of position, and centre halves at left back, Amrabat at left back. So it's really refreshing to see a settled back 4. I think they've played together now. It's 3 games in a row, isn't it? That back 4.
It will have been, yes, because De Ligt
Liverpool,
came in the team
Southampton,
against
Palace,
Liverpool. Yeah. I mean, last season, I think it was after the second game of the season against Tottenham. Luke Shaw, of course, got injured, so there had to be a change there. So I think that would have been Dalot coming into the team because Wan-Bissaka had started the season. And then against Forest, I'm pretty sure Varane got injured at half time or came off at half time. So Lindelof came into the team. So that's a change during the game, the third game of the season. 4th game of the season at Arsenal. One of the reasons why United end up losing it is because the starting centre-backs both went off injured in the second half. So Lindelof and Martinez went off. Maguire and Evans came on, and that was the day that Harry Maguire was actually cheered on by Arsenal fans because that was his, that was the perception of him, unfortunately for him at that time. And the 5th game would have been Brighton, and that was Sergio Reguilón's debut. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. It must have been Dalot at right back because he pretty much started every game at right back last season. Martinez, I think, had recovered, but he wasn't in optimum fitness because a couple of weeks later or a week later he went under the knife to have his metatarsal injury rectified. So 5 games into last season, that's what, four injuries. Shaw, Varane, Lindelof, Martinez, of players coming out of the team for a number of weeks or getting injured during games and forcing changes, and Aloni being signed at the 11th hour. So that was obviously factored into the decision-making process when it came to keeping Ten Hag, and you do have to sympathise with him on that. The amount of changes that went on in the defence last season with 30-odd different back 4 combinations, he will never have that again in his managerial career, I think it's safe to say. And it does make a huge difference this season that he's only made 1 change, and that's been tactical to that back 4 with Maguire coming out and De Ligt coming in. And also during games, he is rotating. He's rotated forwards. He's rotated defenders in game as well. He didn't at the weekend because it was probably because it was 0-0. But
it's quite unique, that, isn't it? You don't often see managers change the centre halves as regularly as Ten Hag does, but he does quite regularly do that at the end of games. He brings in other defenders.
And it did backfire against Brighton. I still stand by that. But when you do it and you win games, it's going to look a lot better. And in fairness to him, United have only had 1 injury this season from their first, how many games they played? 7, including the Community Shield. So they've had 7 games. And I think only one player has got injured, which was Mason Mount at Brighton. So I think it's fair to say that with his rotation strategy, he is partly doing it to keep players fresh and avoid the injury crises they encountered last season. And it's clearly working in that they've had fewer injuries than they did this time last year. And also they're playing a lot better than they were this time last year as well. It's just a pity for them. It's a pity for us as well, because it'd be a lot easier to write about that. It's not reflected in the table because they've not won enough games because they haven't been taking enough of their chances.
7 points after 5. But like you say, a goalless draw at Palace, it's disappointing on the face of it, but there were positives to take, and it does feel like a bit more of a positive podcast despite a goalless draw. When you look at that bench, Samuel, Rasmus Højlund, Marcus Rashford, Manuel Ugarte, Bayendier, Harry Maguire, Mason Mount, Casemiro, Anthony, and Johnny Evans. That was the bench on Saturday. That was the strongest bench they've had since we referenced Brentford, didn't we?
Brentford, it feels like
March.
Yeah.
So that was an incredibly strong bench, worth over 400 million. And that's another refreshing thing, just to have those options from off the bench. I know, kind of ironically, they didn't really work. Højlund came on, Ugarte came on, Rashford came on, and they couldn't win the game. Palace grew an influence at that point. But that's just another positive going forward in the next few weeks. It bodes really well.
It does, and obviously Malacia is starting to take baby steps in terms of participating in team training. You would think Luke Shaw should be getting an appearance in before the October internationals. It'd be interesting to see if he does or doesn't, or what goes on there, because initially it was suggested that he'd be back after the September internationals. People at United said it wouldn't be straight after the September internationals. We've had 3 games since those international matches took place, and obviously tomorrow it's pre-match for the 20 game, and we'll be able to watch training for 15 minutes as well. So Shaw is going to get a mention in some way or form. Lenny Oro is still, that's going to be late October, early November in terms of his return date. Victor Lindelof is back in training if anybody is particularly fussed about him, in case we have some Swedish or Scandinavian listeners, but he's a long way down the centre-back pecking order, and I think, if United can sell him in January, if it's at all possible, I think they'll look to do that, and they certainly need to do that. But they've only got 4 players sidelined. Only one of them would be a starter if he was fit, I think it's safe to say, in Shaw. So it is, as I said, there is a lot of positivity to take at the moment from United, apart from their finishing in front of goal, and that's what it all boils down to.
You don't win games by expected goals, do you? As much as I like to think so. There were moments in that game when I looked at Dalot at left back, and he definitely performed better there on Saturday evening. But when he receives the ball, instead of turning and passing with his left foot down the channel to Garnacho, he kind of cuts inside and plays it in midfield. And there was moments when Garnacho would get a little bit frustrated. Onana also discussed having Luke Shaw back in a post-match interview, I presume with Sky Sports, or it might have been MUTV. And that is why it's important for Shaw to return sooner rather than later, because he does offer that at left back. Being a left-footed player, it brings such advantages to the team in the build-up, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, he's he'll get, as I said, he'll get a mention tomorrow, Luke Shaw, but I do kind of like the Jose Mourinho attitude to injured players, that you until they're fit, you might as well just leave them to it and not dwell on them. There's, Ten Hag did dwell on the absent players a little bit too much last season, but he had a point in that, especially with the 2 left-footers, that did compromise United's balance in defence, and certainly there was not as much quality there. But yeah, Luke Shaw, he's got a long way to go to get his approval ratings back up, because we don't need to spell it out. This is someone who's not played for United since February the 18th. He was all right to play for England during the Euros, came back for his first week of pre-season at United, didn't even participate in a full team training session, got injured again, and that was, 7 weeks ago? So,
I mean, the optics of playing for
United's coping fine without him. I'm not watching United at the moment and thinking, crikey, they really miss Luke Shaw at the moment. They don't.
I'm not thinking
They do
really
to
miss Luke
they
Shaw,
do
but
to
I think
they
they
do
definitely
to an
miss him.
extent. They do to an extent, but as you said, they've kept 3 clean sheets in 5 games. They've created a lot of chances. If he was a striker who got 30 goals a season, I'd say fair enough. They are missing him, but he's not played since mid-February. I think they missed him more last season than they're missing him currently. I don't think he's necessarily going to be the difference maker in that team. The difference maker will be someone who actually starts putting the ball in the back of the net frequently.
That's fair enough. I made the point that I think Shaw was mismanaged last season because when he was returning back from muscle injuries, he was playing games every 3.5 days at average that. And when you return from a muscle injury to increase your load by that rate so quickly, didn't think was clever, and he was just out of action for the majority of the time. So when he does come back, I think he hopefully will be actually eased into action and handled sensibly. So he might not start immediately, just like Højlund, I guess, returning to the squad. On the subject of putting the ball in the back of the net, let's talk about the midfielders. Let's talk about Bruno Fernandez, who had a few chances. He had an evening to forget, Samuel. It's not often that Fernandez has quite a poor game. He lost the ball 34 times, which is more than any other Premier League player has this season. I actually thought in the opening stages his passes were actually quite good in terms of the vision in what he was trying to do was correct, and the players kind of just weren't latching onto them, or there might have been a yard over hit. But I think as the game progressed, he became increasingly sloppy, and like I say, he didn't look his usual himself, did he, Fernandez?
He was appalling, unfortunately for him. And I tweeted it at the time, and I always add that caveat that there's every chance he'll do something, because there've been so many times where he's been playing so badly that it's inevitable that he will score a goal or create a goal, because he has done that. He didn't do it on Saturday, but United played speedy and structured attacking football. There was a real methodology behind it. They were building attacks very impressively. And of course, when he gets the ball and just takes a punt, or is trying to hit the pin immediately or get as close to the pin, it jarred with the way United were playing. And there are, I've got some United supporting friends who, it's almost paradoxical, because he has been United's best player the past 11 years. But they're of the opinion that actually United might somehow be better off without him, because of the way, there's a theory that he inhibits the way they play because of the way
Tries
he
to do everything
plays,
too
and that
quickly.
he's a risk taker. Yeah. It's an interesting theory. I can see some logic in it, but he's a talismanic figure, and I thought he should have come off the mount, but I knew that he wouldn't come off because he's the captain, and because there is a chance that he could do something out of nothing, because he's done it so often before. But the whole thing about, like, just going off on a slight tangent with him, there was a lot of some dance about him signing a new contract. He got that new contract because it was a pay rise, because he deserved a pay rise. And I can understand why he was pushing for a pay rise as well, because the highest earners in the squad before him were Casemiro and Marcus Rashford, who both played like a drain last season. He played brilliantly last season, and he played brilliantly the season before that under Ten Hag. He was made captain at the start of last season as well. But you look at his contract length, it went up by a year. Like, if fans are that daft to think that this shows how committed Bruno Fernandes is to us, it had nothing to do with commitment. His previous contract had a maximum expiry date of 2027. It now has a maximum expiry date of 2028, I think it is. His previous contract renewal as well, it only took the expiry date up by a year, only extended it by a year. And that's because, again, he'd have been 2 years in at United, and he merited a pay rise because he'd had a brilliant couple of years, and he'd won the Sir Matt Busby Player of the Year award a couple of times. The timing was a problem because it was March, April 2022. United were in the midst of their worst season in decades, and it was about to get considerably worse as well, with a few more tonkings to come against Liverpool and Brighton. But I've no problem with him saying, "Look, give me a pay rise because look what I've done." He deserves to be United's highest earner, but it was a question asked of Dan Ashworth, how crucial was it to nail him down? Well, do you know what? It wasn't that crucial, because if he really wanted out, they'd have got a very good fee for him, and there would have been a very easy way of spinning it as a positive. It would be like, he's been brilliant, but he's this age now, he wants to go to Saudi, or blah, blah, blah. And we're going to use this opportunity.
It wouldn't have.
No, it wouldn't.
Best
but you could have
last
seen it.
10 years.
No, I completely agree with that. I've just said that he's a brilliant character. He's a brilliant captain. He's a brilliant player, and he has been brilliant for United for 4.5 years. The vast majority of that time, he's a player they cannot do without. And I agree that United, it was correct for United to time down a new contract, but it wouldn't have been difficult to have used it as a positive. I mean, they're doing it with very different circumstances with Lenny Yoro. He has his metatarsal fracture, out for 3 months. That's a galling start for an 18-year-old who's just signed for Manchester United. But United are thinking, look, you're going to get your foot sorted. Use this as time to acclimatise to Manchester, get to know the surroundings of the place at Carrington, city centre, where you're living. And then when you're fit, you'll be able to hit the ground running, because you familiarise yourself with all that without playing. To see that as a benefit. So it wouldn't have been a problem for United to have framed it as a benefit with Fernandez if he ended up leaving in the summer. But as soon as they won the FA Cup, the chances of him leaving decreased drastically. I don't think any team was going to come in for him at that point. If United had finished 8th, not won the FA Cup, not been in Europe this season, and sacked their manager, they would have been pretty vulnerable to the possibility of Fernandez going. But it changed completely on that day, on that last Saturday in May when they beat Manchester City. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how he responds to his. Certainly against Tottenham more so than Twente, just responds to his performance against Palace, because it was probably Fernandez at his worst. But I remember how bad he was against Liverpool in the first half in the league game in April. I think I might have written it down at half time as like one of his worst 45 minutes for United. 5-10 minutes into the second half, he clips that ball in beautifully, and the game turns on its head. And that is what he can do. That's why he is their talisman.
Wasn't Turf Moor an example of that last season, if I remember correctly? I think he had quite a poor game, and then he played the ball in the box for Johnny Evans to score the 1-0 in September. I think I'm right in saying that.
It was the other way around. Johnny Evans playing the ball into the box for him to score.
I was coughing there, not having a brain fart while you were correcting my information. There you go. I mean, it's over a year now, isn't it? It's flew over that game. That time.
Yeah.
We'll move on to Kobbie Mainoo now, Samuel. I thought he looked to have his sparkle back on Saturday. He was rested against Barnsley. And when you think about it, in the last year, I mean, he's just been on the go non-stop, hasn't he? How many games he's played since making his full Premier League debut at Goodison Park against Everton. He was obviously involved in the Summer with England in the latter stages of that competition. Played for England in the final, of course, started against Spain. And like I say, he looked really sharp again. But I think that highlights the importance of managing Mainoo's minutes, because he is just a young player. You look at Barcelona, how many young talents they've had come through in the last few years. And probably because of their financial situation, they've actually had to overplay these young lads. And when you look at Ansu Fati, he's picked up injuries, or maybe even Pedri, in fact, he's picked up a few. So United have to manage Mainoo, and I think it makes complete sense in the early rounds of cup competitions to give him a rest, to get the best out of him in these games.
Yeah, and it's probably advisable that he's on the bench against Twente as well, ahead of starting against Tottenham on Sunday. That's the benefit, one of the big benefits of Europa League or Champions League, especially with this daft new format where you can finish 16th in a league and you're still technically in the competition, is that you can rest players, you can rotate. And United did that when it was a group stage as well, and Ten Hag did that last week against Barnsley. He'll do that this week against Twente as well. And he's, as I said, I touched upon it earlier in terms of rotation. It clearly is. They are benefiting from it by giving players a breather during games or in the week, whether it's just putting them on the bench or leaving them on the bench. And Mainoo did look weary at the start of the season, and he didn't have a good start to the season either. I mean, the way he got pickpocketed against Liverpool, he could have been mistaken for Casemiro at that point, and something needed to be done. And it did help as well that I don't think he played at all for England in their second game against Finland. Wasn't it at Wembley? That said, he had a bit of a dodgy start against Southampton in United's first game back, but he did look more like his old self at the weekend. He looked a lot more confident. His body language looked a lot better, and I don't say that his body language looked negative previously. It's just that he didn't look as confident on the ball, and he looked a bit more lethargic. But that's inevitable because it has been a pretty taxing 9 or 10 months now. It was November he came back into the team, wasn't it, last year? So
I think there's a lot of things he does.
It's flown by.
Sorry, Sam, that kind of go under the radar when he does these kind of little flicks around the corner with these kind of intricate passes, and you take them for granted because he's just been so good in the last 11, 12 months. If you actually follow him and just watch Mainoo during the game, there's a lot of good stuff in there. But you're right, it was definitely back to being sharp on Saturday. It is FC20 on Wednesday night, the opening Europa League game.
No mention of Jamie Redknapp.
Do you want to talk? You briefly mentioned it.
I think it's more. I think it's more interesting than FC20 and discussing Ricky van Volswinkel's record for Norwich City 10 or 11 years ago, whenever it was. He was with them. But I like with the Redknapp thing, I mean, one, it was just an imbecilic thing to say. There was no context on it whatsoever. No consideration that United's top scorer this season is Garnacho, who started. No consideration that their player of the month for August was Ahmad, who started. We knew going into the game at the weekend that there was going to be a big hitter in attack, a big-ish hitter, if you like, who's going to miss out. And it was a surprise that Rashford missed out, and that was partly because of the way Ten Hag had spoken about him on Friday at the press conference. But as it was pointed out to me, like Ten Hag was asked a question, he gave a very straight and detailed answer, and the way he's not going to allow a press conference question or answer to dictate how he's going to go about choosing his lineup for a game. And he'd have known by then that Rashford wasn't going to start. It was still a surprise. A lot of people would disagree with it. There are aspects of his rotation that are inconsistent, such as Christian Eriksen, who is, I think he's the second oldest outfield player in the United squad, starting 3 games on the spin. But Eriksen was also United's best outfield player for me at Palace on Saturday. So that selection was totally vindicated. And United were a more threatening side without Rashford on the pitch at Palace. That's just what a weird game it was at the weekend. And this is the frustrating thing, I think, even as a journalist, when you see some pundits, it's how, I mean, they're very well paid, obviously, which is a different kind of frustration. But a lot of them are extremely ill-informed. And what we do in terms of the piece we do, the stories we do, we're sourcing them, we're talking to people, we're trying to provide as much context as possible. A guy just blurting out, something must have happened, it must be something untoward. Get off to GB News if you're going to spout a baseless claim like that. And I don't have a problem with Ten Hag and the dig at him. I mean, Ten Hag has got a form for it. He has had a pop at pundits, conveniently pundits who haven't played for United as well, and pundits who would be viewed as easily seen as unpopular in the eyes of United fans, whether it's Jamie Carragher, former Liverpool, Jamie Redknapp, former Liverpool, maybe just Jamie's, but Alan Shearer, of course, he dubbed stupid, which I thought was a bit extreme for his analysis of Rashford against Brighton. I thought Shearer's analysis was completely fair and well presented as well. So he's not all. I don't always agree with Ten Hag's version of those events, but he was right to dig Redknapp out over that, because it was a baseless claim. There was no context whatsoever, and although Sky Sports are a different entity from Sky Sports News, I go back to Sky Sports News' decision a few years ago to jettison their United authority James Cooper, since then, there's been a revolving cast list of reporters from Sky turning up at Carrington over the course of the season. Last season, there must have been 10 different reporters. If you do that, you're not going to ever have, you're not going to be an authority on Manchester United. And you'd think that if there's one club you've got to be an authority on, it's got to be United. And it does seem like there is, that has kind of festered its way through to the pundits as well, because as I've always said, context is key, and there was absolutely no context given whatsoever. And I think he stood by Phil Jones as well, who was a pundit, and let's face it, Phil Jones is not going to be providing any context in that situation either.
Well, Phil Jones has just been on the podcast with Jake Humphrey, so I'm sure you'll be listening to that, won't you, while you're on your stroll or doing something later
high
on.
Performance. Jesus.
You know what's funny? I've told you this. I've actually admitted I've listened to the occasional episode when I'm in the gym. Passes time. It does. Only if I find the guest really interesting.
You even use it to motivate you. I mean,
well, you know what, Samuel? It's when you live such a high performance lifestyle, you've got to buy into these kind of things. Before we end the podcast, it's worth quickly talking about the Europa League. I know you said it's quite boring, but me and Rich were talking about it on the journey down to Croydon, and you read out the teams that were in the competition. No, because when you actually look at the odds, if United don't at least make it to the semi-finals, I'd go as far as saying that is a huge failure. Tottenham and United are currently joint favourites. Roma are third favourites. They've just sacked the Rossi. They're in a mess
their manager,
at the moment. Yeah. Exactly, in Serie A. Athletic Bilbao, they've just moved up to third in La Liga. They are, you could see them going into the last stages.
And the finals at their stadium as well, isn't it?
There you go. So that's an advantage. Yeah. I mean, Lazio, Eintracht Frankfurt, Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, and Nice. But I mean, you read those names.
Are Sevilla in this, or are they not following with it this year?
PTSD with Sevilla. I don't think they're in it this year. Thankfully not. No. But I mean, Spanish sides, Europa League, United, I guess fair then. But come on, Samuel, they should be going a long way in this, shouldn't they?
They should be. I wasn't quite aware it was that underwhelming a lineup. So you've really set the pulses racing ahead of the Europa Leagues.
Because there's no Champions League teams coming into it either this year, which is another key component of it as well.
No. Well, this is the strange thing about it. By far and away, the most watchable and pulsating Europa League tie United have had in the Europa League, full stop, in fact, was against Barcelona, and that was a playoff, a knockout playoff before just to get into the round of 16. It was a quirk of it, the way it worked back then. It was possibly a little bit unfair that because you finished second in your group, your Europa League group, there was a chance that you would come up against a team that had been relegated from the Champions League. And look, we weren't complaining because those two games were memorable. It felt like the eyes of the footballing world were on those two games as well, because it was for me anyway, the two of the three biggest football clubs on the planet. The games were brilliant. It ended brilliantly for United as well, getting through on aggregate 4-3 in the end, I think it was on aggregate. Very memorable matches, just a week apart as well. So it really did feel like a sense of occasion was brought to the Europa League by United coming up against Barcelona. But all it did was get United a last 16 tie against Real Betis. That was the quirk of it. It's normally a tie that you'd associate with a quarter-final or a semi-final rather than a knockout just to get into the round of 16. I mean, the saturation of football it is overkill now. The prospect of an expanded World Cup, which is going to happen, fills me with dread, because the last few World Cups have been really good and really watchable, and that's because of the format. There's nothing wrong with the format. I get that the Champions League group stage format wasn't perfect and you could have some real dead rubbers in it. I don't think having more football is the way forward with the Europa League. I just disagree with that as a league format. It was way, way better when it was the UEFA Cup and it was just knockout. I know you'd have, again, some underwhelming ties along the way, but if you adjusted the seeding and made it a bit more competitive from the start and made it a bit more, if you introduce more jeopardy to it, I think it could have worked that way. But they wanted a league format, and then they had to find all sorts of ways to incentivize winning the Europa League. If you won it, you would go in the Champions League, and then that wasn't good enough. So it was, if you won it, you'd go in the Champions League and you'd go in as a top seed. And it's a competition that is only watchable from the quarterfinals onwards. It feels like from the quarterfinals onwards, it feels like it's worth tuning in for. But I don't think I watched any of the Champions League games last week, and I'm sure I'm in the minority. And it is a bit different for us in that where we're so immersed in the football industry that sometimes we want to come up for air and have a bit of escapism and tune into something else. But
Go watch Interstellar on
it's
Friday night and the 10th year anniversary, stuff like that.
yeah, that was for you. For me, it was watching the Penguin pilot, which I thought was superb, and catching up with a bit more of House of Dragons. So fortunately, HBO have provided me with more
You're
entertainment.
finally watching it. Yeah.
Yeah, more entertainment than Atalanta Arsenal anyway. But that's it's all down to choice, and clearly these power brokers think that there's a demand for it. But it is pretty ironic of Alexander Seferin, the UEFA president, who 3 and a bit years ago he called Ed Woodward, Andrea Agnelli, all that lot who were behind the Super League. He called them snakes. The reason why that collapsed is because of English football supporters, and what's he done? He's cooked up a format that really feels like it's a sign of the Super League. Yeah, Milan and Liverpool coming together this early, Inter Milan and City coming together this early, and those games becoming more regular, and they could meet each other again in the competition. It's almost like it feels a bit like a Super League, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. I describe it as 2 words: woke nonsense. The new table, the Europa League and Champions League table. I presume the Conference League could be the same actually, but God, could you imagine what that looks like when that comes out? Thanks for your time as usual, Samuel.
Thank you. I've just had another great message that the press conference tomorrow will now
Yeah,
be 4:30 rather than it was advertised on the UEFA website. I say advertised, it was billed on the UEFA website as midday. It's now risen to 4:30. As I said in my newsletter last week, United, they used to raise transfer fees. They don't do that anymore. Instead, they just raise press conference times.
it's getting later and later, isn't it?
Oh,
Thanks to the listeners as usual. Have a great week. We'll be back later on in the week to review FC20 and look ahead to Tottenham at the weekend. Take care.